Anchorage Tower. This is Orville Peabody in Air Force 67498. I'm over Kodiak at 20,000, descending and would very much like to land at your airport. Over. Oh, shucks, I guess I must have been tuned to the wrong frequency.
Not everyone has the communications difficulties that our friend Orville has. But there's an alarming number of pilots who aren't as familiar with their radios as they should be. Quite often, this lack of fundamental know-how is costly and time-consuming. A friend of mine has been flying for over 6 years and has logged a good deal of time. Yet, whenever he visits Los Angeles, he lands at an airport without a control tower, a good 25 miles from his destination. An inquiry as to why he does this always starts him on a rampage against tower operators, complex procedures, and possible collisions with some gigantic airliner. His basic problem is that he doesn't have the confidence and basic comprehension required to utilize the vast communication system provided him by the Federal Aviation Agency. Now, you can readily see that a firm understanding of radio communications and just a little practice will more than pay for itself in terms of safety, time, and money. Learning how to communicate with a control tower is a relatively easy chore and can be quite a lot of fun. Any aircraft having two-way radio may establish radio communications by calling the desired control tower. No particular code or procedures for such air-ground radio contacts are required on the part of the pilot. You should never hesitate to use the radio due to a lack of familiarity with radio telephone procedure. A message in your own words is always acceptable. Procedures, however, are desirable. There's one very good reason for this. Procedures allow more pilots to use a radio frequency in any given amount of time. Towers will always use standard radio telephone procedures to the greatest extent practicable without changing the meaning of the message. Most pilots also, as they gain experience in the use of two-way radio, pick up these standard phraseologies and add them to their radio vocabularies. Thus, the practice of phrasing information in a few standardized words or expressions is referred to as radio telephone procedure. Procedure is necessary because of the relatively few radio frequencies available for air-to-ground communications, and due to the large volume of traffic on these frequencies. But remember, procedures are suggested as a communications aid. Never hesitate to use the radio due to the lack of them or fear of using them incorrectly. The function of a control tower is divided up into 4 phases. 1, the control of arriving traffic. 2, the dispersal of departing aircraft. 3, the dissemination of various information as requested by the pilot. And 4, emergency assistance. Now, this record was produced with 2 purposes in mind. To teach you the vast services available from a control tower to any aircraft with a two-way radio, and secondly, to present the proper methods to be used in obtaining and utilizing these aids. The communications on this record were recorded in over 15 hours of flight time. These conversations were then edited and rearranged so as to present an educational aid providing you with the maximum amount of assistance in the acquisition of correct radio skills and habits. Let's start with the basic rudiments of tower communications and see how initial calls to a tower should be made. Turn the radio on and give it ample time to warm up. When ready to transmit, make sure no one else is talking. Hold the microphone close to your mouth. After giving thought to what you are going to say, depress the microphone button and speak clearly in a normal tone of voice. Don't forget to release the microphone button at the end of your transmission. Failure to do this will result in your not getting a reply to your call. You see, when you press the mic button, you are activating a relay which takes the electrical power in your receiver and transfers it to your transmitter. Releasing your mic button causes your receiver to become alive once more. When initiating a call, be sure to state the name of the tower you're calling, your full aircraft identification, and the frequency over which you expect a reply.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor, 120.5, over.
Beechcraft 2364 Victor, this is Long Beach Tower.
Once the initial contact has been established, you may reduce your identification to only the last 3 digits. Since most conversations involve traffic control and handling, the control tower operator will need to know your position and your intentions.
Long Beach Tower, Beechcraft 64 Victor is at the northwest end of the field. Request taxi instructions, over.
Beach 64 Victor, runway 16 left, wind south-southeast 7, altimeter 299er2, time 05. Taxi via the east-west taxiway, hold short of the runway.
That was a typical ground clearance. The pilot was given instructions to taxi to the runway in use, which in this case was runway 16 left. The surface wind, altimeter setting, and time check were also given. When a pilot is departing from his own field, he knows where the various runways are and how to get to them. However, if you're departing a strange field, it's always a good idea to procure a copy of the airport taxi chart from one of the local operators. This chart pictorially shows the airport layout and the taxiways to use in getting from any point on the surface to any other. However, if you fail to get one, or if one is not available, all you have to do is ask the tower for more detailed taxi instructions.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 64 Victor again. I'm not familiar with your airport. Would you please guide me to the active runway, over?
Beach 64 Victor, taxi eastbound from your present position, and I'll keep you advised.
64 Victor, roger.
At many highly congested airports, the tower is sometimes so engrossed with the management of airborne traffic that it has limited time to allot its attentions to ground traffic. When this occurs, the tower will be divided into 2 sections, one for the handling of airborne traffic and one for the control of ground traffic. Now, this latter section is referred to as ground control and should be used whenever ground instructions or assistance are needed. Aeronautical charts do not tell a pilot whether or not a particular airport has ground control. Before departing an unfamiliar field, it's a good idea to ask a local pilot whether or not the ground facility is available. However, if you're in your ship and ready to taxi, a quick call to the tower will readily determine the availability of ground control.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor at the northwest end of the field. Request taxi instructions, over.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, Long Beach Tower. Contact ground control on 121.9er. Over.
121.9, roger.
The truth of the matter is, whenever any question arises pertinent to the safe and efficient operation of your aircraft, the control tower will always be available to solve your problem. Never hesitate in using your radio. It is the most vital source of information at your disposal. In communicating with ground control, the procedures to be used are identical to those in conversing with the tower. First, the initial contact, and then the message. Remember, ground control and the tower are one and the same. There just happens to be 2 controllers and 2 frequencies to help relieve the congestion.
Long Beach Ground Control, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor, over.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, Long Beach Ground Control, over.
Roger, 64 Victor is at the northwest end of the field. Request taxi instructions, over.
Beach 64 Victor, runway 16 left, wind south-southeast 7, altimeter 299er3, time 06. Taxi via the east-west taxiway, hold short of the runway, over.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, roger.
The ground controller told the pilot to hold short of the runway, meaning that he should maintain a distance of at least 100 feet from the active runway. Most large airports have a double yellow line painted on the taxiways just prior to a runway intersection. Pilots must never cross these lines unless cleared to do so by the tower. This prevents ground traffic from interfering with landing aircraft. Be certain to keep on the alert for these double lines, as they indicate you are approaching a runway. Along with giving you taxi instructions, ground control will also give you additional data concerning your safety on the airport. Be sure to always keep the volume on your radio at a high enough level to hear the controller. Many pilots become involved in hazardous situations that otherwise could have been avoided had they listened for warnings from the ground controller. Here's a few typical notices that we recorded.
Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, caution on the DC-3 taxiing toward you from your right, over.
6-4 Victor, roger.
Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, caution the men and equipment working ahead, over.
6-4 Victor, roger.
Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, caution the Navion to the right, over.
6-4 Victor, roger.
When adverse weather conditions exist, and there is doubt as to whether or not you are aware of them, you might expect a call like this.
Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, flash advisory. Surface winds are forecast to be 30 knots, with gusts to 45 knots at Long Beach after 2300, over.
6-4 Victor, thank you.
Ground control should be monitored until you have completed your run-up. When you're ready for takeoff, switch over to the tower frequency.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor, runway 16 left. Ready for takeoff, over.
Beach 6-4 Victor, cleared for takeoff.
So far, every time a transmission has been made to 6-4 Victor, the pilot has acknowledged the message. There are occasions when these acknowledgments are unnecessary and serve only to take up time. For example, if the tower clears you for takeoff and you are in plain sight of the controllers, they would be able to tell at a glance whether or not you heard them. However, if your takeoff is obscured to the tower by a building or some other obstacle, then it is necessary to let the operator know you've heard the clearance. Another time when no acknowledgement is necessary is when the tower gives you some information and then in the same breath begins talking to someone else.
Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, cleared for takeoff. Piper 6-5 Pop, continue downwind until further advised, over.
On the ground, a pilot taxis and makes his engine run up at relatively low power settings. Thus, the cockpit remains relatively quiet. You'll have no difficulty in hearing any transmissions made to you by the tower. Once you're airborne and are using a great deal of engine power, the noise level in the airplane will increase to the point that you won't hear any calls unless you turn up your volume control. Experienced pilots make it a habit to increase their volume just prior to takeoff, thereby eliminating the chance of missing an important call. Here's a transmission that pilots in slow aircraft will sometimes hear immediately after takeoff.
Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, veer 10 degrees to your left. Traffic is at DC-8 in position, ready for takeoff, over.
6-4 Victor.
As soon as 6-4 Victor veers to the left of the runway and the tower operator determines it is safe for the DC-8 to overtake the Bonanza, the large jet will be cleared for takeoff.
United 52, cleared for takeoff.
There is a standard departure to be used when takeoff has been accomplished. Take a look at the back of the Tower Communications album and notice the departure route for runway 16 left. Normal procedure calls for a pilot to climb straight ahead until he has passed the airport boundary and has gained an altitude of at least 600 feet above the ground. Then, a 90-degree climbing turn is made to the left. The pilot continues his climb on the crosswind leg of the traffic pattern for just a few seconds. After determining that he is not conflicting with inbound traffic, he makes a 45-degree turn to the right and departs the control zone in that direction. Whenever a left turn is to be made after takeoff, the runway is said to have a left traffic pattern. You'll notice that a right turn is to be made after taking off from runway 16 right. This means that runway 16 right has a right traffic pattern. Sometimes a pilot will take off from a strange airport and not know whether he is taking off from a runway with a right pattern or a left pattern. When such a doubt exists, a simple call to the tower will solve the problem.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beach 64 Victor. Does runway 16 left have a right or a left pattern? Over.
Beach 64 Victor, left pattern, runway 16 left.
Departing from runway 16 left in a conventional manner is very convenient for those aircraft whose destination is toward the southeast. What if 64 Victor wanted to go to Los Angeles, which is located in exactly the opposite direction, toward the northwest? Well, there are some non-standard departures that are sometimes more convenient than the standard departure when you consider your intended direction of flight. There are 3 such non-standard departures. However, they can only be used when prior permission is obtained from the control tower. These departures are shown on the back of your album. There is the straight-out departure, which allows an aircraft to take off and continue his climb in the same direction until he has left the control zone. Then there is the right turnout, which allows you to make a right turn instead of a left turn after takeoff. Of course, if you were operating from runway 16 right, then a left turnout would be the type of departure you'd have to request. The last type of non-standard departure is the downwind departure. In this case, you would take off, turn left, and then make another left turn so as to fly parallel to the runway on the downwind leg of the pattern. It is important to remember, however, that you should always depart the traffic pattern in a normal manner, unless permission to do otherwise is obtained from the tower, either prior to or during your takeoff.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 64 Victor, departing runway 16 left. Request a straight-out departure. Over.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, straight out departure approved. Over.
64 Victor, roger. Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 64 Victor. Request a right turnout. Over.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, right turn approved.
64 Victor, roger.
The normal departure that we've discussed so far is to be used under clear weather or VFR conditions. That is, when the visibility is at least 3 miles and the cloud ceiling is at least 1,000 feet above the ground. Normally, when weather conditions do not meet these VFR minimums, only pilots with instrument ratings are allowed to depart radio-controlled airports. However, when only the visibility is reduced and there are no clouds preventing VFR flight, exceptions to the rule can be made, and pilots are allowed to operate within the control zone under what is called controlled VFR. For example, the Los Angeles area often experiences days when the skies are clear of clouds, yet the visibility is reduced to less than 3 miles because of a haze and smoke condition. Many other metropolitan areas also experience this same condition from time to time. This poor visibility layer extends from the ground to normally 1,500 feet above the airport. When on top of this condition, visibility is usually quite good, and the horizon is very pronounced. The only problem a pilot has is getting from the airport to VFR conditions above the haze and smoke, or VFR on top. Even though while climbing through this haze and smoke the horizon is obscured, a pilot will always see the ground by looking straight down. The tower cannot release control VFR traffic as rapidly as it can when clear weather prevails. The restricted visibility prevents the controller from actually seeing his traffic, and therefore he can only release one aircraft at a time. He must make sure that a departing aircraft is on top of the layer of haze and smoke before he can release another aircraft. This procedure maintains the sufficient traffic separation required. No other method would do. 2 pilots climbing through a heavy layer of haze and smoke are normally unable to see one another unless they're too close to one another to begin with. When controllers do release aircraft under control VFR conditions, aircraft are required to abide by special instructions. These clearances usually take the form of various types of climbing instructions. The following communications were recorded on a day when the sky at Long Beach was clear, but the visibility was reduced to 2 miles due to a haze and smoke condition. Listen to these climb instructions and use the airport diagram on the back of the Tower Communications album to determine the various departure routes described.
Long Beach Ground Control, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor at the terminal building. Request taxi instructions. Over.
Beechcraft 2364 Victor, Long Beach Ground Control. Your transmission was partly broken up. Say again.
Roger. Beechcraft 64 Victor is at the terminal building. Request taxi instructions, over.
Beach 64 Victor, runway 16 left, wind south 7, altimeter 3001, time 09, taxi northbound, hold short of the runway. Over.
64 Victor, roger.
So far, the pilot has had no indication from ground control that the weather is below VFR minimums. It is the pilot's direct responsibility to avail himself of the current weather at the airport. The tower personnel will always assume you are aware of the current airport weather. However, if you aren't quite sure whether or not it is VFR, a quick call will readily establish the existing conditions.
Long Beach Ground, this is Beechcraft 64 Victor again. What is your current visibility, over?
Beach 64 Victor, Long Beach weather clear, visibility 2 miles. Over.
Roger, 64 Victor. Can we get a controlled VFR departure, over?
Affirmative.
Thank you.
The pilot asked if he could get a controlled VFR departure because he knew that if he couldn't, he would have to have an instrument rating to legally take off. If the weather were reported as 200 feet overcast with a half-mile visibility due to fog, a controlled VFR departure would definitely not be approved. Instrument clearances and controlled VFR clearances can sound very similar. If you don't have an instrument rating, be certain you are not being given a clearance you cannot comply with.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, clearance ready to copy.
64 Victor, go ahead.
Beach 64 Victor, clear to on top after takeoff. Climb visual flight straight out to VFR conditions on top. If not on top at the shoreline, reverse course. Maintain at or below 2,000 and advise. Report in VFR conditions to the Long Beach Tower. Last tops reported 1,200 feet. Over.
Roger. I understand I am to climb straight ahead after takeoff, if not on top by the shoreline, to reverse course and continue climb to VFR conditions on top. Report reversing course at the shoreline and also upon reaching VFR on top.
Beach 64 Victor, clearance correct. Contact tower on 120.5 when ready for takeoff. Over.
64 Victor, roger. Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 64 Victor, ready for takeoff. Runway 16 left, over.
Roger, 64 Victor. Hold position. Number 7 for departure.
Roger. Could you give me an estimated departure time, over?
Expect departure clearance in 20 minutes. Over.
64 Victor, roger.
When a clearance is received by a pilot, he is urged to repeat the clearance back to the controller. This not only lets the tower operators know that you understand the climb instructions, but it also gives you the peace of mind of knowing that you are fully aware of how to successfully complete your climb out. Here's another controlled VFR departure we received on the same day.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, cleared to on top. After takeoff, climb visual flight straight ahead to 800 feet. Make a left turn and climb via the downwind leg not to exceed 3 minutes. If not in VFR conditions at that time, reverse course and continue climb to VFR conditions. Report in VFR conditions to the Long Beach Tower. Over.
Roger. Climb to 800 feet and then climb on the downwind leg not to exceed 2 minutes. Then reverse course and report on top to the tower. Over.
A negative 64 Victor. Climb on the downwind leg not to exceed 3 minutes. Repeat, 3 minutes. Over.
Understand, 3 minutes, 64 Victor.
That's correct, 64 Victor. Change to tower frequency 120.5 when ready for takeoff. Over.
64 Victor, roger. Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor, runway 16 left. Ready for takeoff, over.
Beach 64 Victor, cleared for takeoff. Report VFR on top. Over.
64 Victor, roger.
Once the pilot has taken off, he climbs so as to comply with his clearance and reports to the tower as soon as he is on top of the haze and smoke layer.
Long Beach Tower, Beechcraft 64 Victor is on top at 1,400 feet, over.
Beach 64 Victor on top at 1,400. Frequency change approved.
The previous portion of this record dealt primarily with departures. The remaining time is devoted to aircraft arriving at their destination, culminating with an actual lost aircraft problem. Control towers have authority within a certain radius of the airport. This area of jurisdiction is called a control zone. A control zone normally has a 3-mile radius or a 5-mile radius, depending on the individual airport. When approaching an airport for landing instructions, a pilot must call before he enters the airport control zone. As a matter of fact, the initial call should be made at least 10 miles from the airport. This will give you plenty of time to plan your approach properly. Refer again to the back of your Tower Communications album. You'll be needing it for the next few minutes. Notice the entry patterns to be used for runways 16 left and 16 right. Runway 16 left is said to have a left traffic pattern because a pilot approaching maintains a counterclockwise flight path with respect to the runway. The turns he makes from the downwind leg to the base leg and from base leg to final approach are left turns. Runway 16 right has a right traffic pattern for similar reasons. For a smooth flow of traffic to exist about an airport, all aircraft must conform to the correct traffic pattern. It is therefore very important that all pilots arriving at an airport determine the type of traffic pattern and the direction of the runway in use. This information is obtained during the initial call to the tower, prior to entering the control zone. Listen for it.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor over Laguna Beach at 4,500 feet. Request landing instructions, over.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, runway 16 left, wind south-southeast 5, altimeter 299 6. Report downwind opposite the tower, over.
64 Victor, roger.
When reporting your position, it is very important that you be as accurate as possible. A tower operator depends on this. He will use your position report and those of other aircraft in the area to form a smooth and expeditious flow of traffic. Don't report yourself over a particular point if you're just approaching it. Be accurate.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor, 1 mile south of Huntington Beach. Request landing instructions, over.
Beechcraft 64 Victor, 1 mile south of Huntington Beach, runway 16 left, wind south-southeast 5, altimeter 299 6. Report downwind opposite the tower, over.
64 Victor, roger.
Runways are numbered according to their magnetic direction, minus the last digit. For example, a runway with a magnetic direction of 270 degrees would be called runway 27. If its direction were 330 degrees, the runway number would be 33. From our landing instructions, we know that we'll be landing almost toward the south, or in the direction of 160 degrees. The runway to be used is 16 left. But do we use a left or right pattern? The information was given in the landing instructions, but slightly disguised. Unless otherwise specified, always assume a traffic pattern to be to the left. Therefore, runway 16 left has a left pattern because the controller didn't say it had a right pattern. Now, here's what the landing instructions would have been like if runway 16 right were in use.
Beach 64 Victor, 1 mile south of Huntington Beach, right traffic, runway 16 right, wind south-southeast 5, altimeter 299 6. Report downwind west of the airport, over.
64 Victor, roger.
Now, we know from before that we're to enter a left traffic pattern for runway 16 left. The proper way to enter the traffic pattern for runway 16 left is shown on the back of your album. Your objective is to arrive over position A at the correct pattern altitude for the Long Beach Airport. The pattern altitude is the altitude at which you should enter the control zone. You should also maintain the pattern altitude until your descent for landing begins. The pattern altitude is usually flown 800 feet above the airport. If you know the elevation of the airport, simply add 800 to it, to get the correct pattern altitude. Denver, Colorado is 5,300 feet above sea level. The correct pattern altitude for the Denver airport would therefore be 6,100 feet above sea level. The correct pattern altitude should be used for several reasons. First of all, other aircraft in front of you will be easier to see. Second of all, the runway will always have the same perspective, and consistently accurate landings can be accomplished with greater ease. There are two good reasons for never entering a traffic pattern below the proper altitude. First, in the event of an engine failure, you'll need all the altitude you can get. Second, maintaining the correct altitude will help with the noise abatement program. Many airports throughout the country are being closed because people who live nearby are constantly registering noise complaints with local airport managers. Once we've entered the traffic pattern, it is a simple matter to comply with the tower's instructions and give them a call downwind opposite the tower.
Long Beach Tower, Beach 6-4 Victor is downwind opposite the tower. Over.
Beach 6-4 Victor, cleared to land.
6-4 Victor, roger.
Once cleared to land, the pilot turns on to base leg and then on to final approach until touchdown. The traffic patterns for runways 30, 7 left, and 25 left are also left patterns. When this record is over, it would be a good idea for you to lightly draw in the traffic patterns for these runways. Also, determine the point from which you would approach each runway. This will give you some practice and will make in-flight figuring a little easier. Runways 12, 7 right, and 25 right have right traffic patterns. Determine the approach patterns for these runways also. The manner in which 6-4 Victor was cleared to land was relatively simple. There was no other traffic to worry about. There are many occasions where there may be several aircraft in the traffic pattern ahead of you. Under these high-density conditions, the tower operators are pretty busy and are constantly transmitting. The tower frequency can become so congested that you may find it difficult to find a dead spot during which you can report your position. Imagine Bonanza 6-4 Victor is flying on the downwind leg, trying to report his position, and he can't seem to get a word in edgewise. He might be hearing something like this from his receiver.
Piper 42 Pop, cleared for takeoff. Navy on 42 Kilo, taxi into position number 1 and hold. Apache 76 Pop, taxi into position and hold behind the Navy on. Cessna 65 Fox, circle the airport. Douglas 679, runway 16 left. Navy on 42 Kilo, cleared for takeoff. Cessna 23 Victor, taxi into position behind the Apache and hold.
All this may sound very involved, and indeed the tower operator has got a lot of traffic on his hands. This, however, is no reason for 6-4 Victor to get excited. Since he can't stop in midair, all he can do is continue on an extended downwind leg. Finally, when he can make a transmission, it'll sound like this.
Long Beach Tower, Beach 6-4 Victor is on an extended downwind leg approximately 2 miles north of the airport. Over.
Beach 6-4 Victor, I have 2 Bonanzas in sight on an extended downwind leg. 6-4 Victor, rock your wings.
6-4 Victor, roger.
Roger, in sight. Number 3 to land, following the Bonanza downwind ahead.
6-4 Victor, roger.
All that is necessary now is for 6-4 Victor to space himself accordingly behind the other Bonanza and proceed to land. If he can't do this without assistance from this record, he's got bigger problems than you're having in learning correct radio procedures. It is not uncommon for aircraft to follow one another in the traffic pattern. Just a few moments ago, 6-4 Victor was number 3 to land, following a Bonanza ahead of him. Once a pilot has been told to follow another aircraft, it is the pilot's responsibility to find his traffic and keep it in sight throughout the remainder of his approach. Quite often, pilots have difficulty in actually seeing the traffic they're supposed to follow. And when this occurs, let the tower know immediately.
Beach 6-4 Victor is downwind. Over.
Bonanza 6-4 Victor, number 2 to land, following the Aranca Champion on base leg. Over.
I don't have him in sight. Over.
The Aronca is to your left turning final approach. He's yellow and blue and just passing over the schoolhouse.
Roger, I've got him in sight now.
If you finally spot your traffic and lose track of him again, don't be embarrassed to tell the tower. They're there to help you, and after all, it's your life.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beach 6-4 Victor again. I've lost sight of the Aronca, over.
Bonanza 6-4 Victor, you appear to be overtaking your traffic. He's about 1/2 mile ahead of you on final approach.
I still don't have him in sight.
Bonanza 6-4 Victor, you're too close to traffic. Go around.
6-4 Victor, going around, Roger.
This was a typical case where a shy pilot could have become quite involved if he didn't advise the tower of his difficulty. As a matter of fact, this is one of many cases that illustrate the point that a busy radio-controlled airport can be much safer than a non-radio-controlled airport. The tower is there to help and assist you. Pilots should learn to take advantage of these services more frequently. When 6-4 Victor was advised to abort his approach and go around, he followed the standard go-around procedure. He immediately began to climb back to pattern altitude and fly parallel to the downwind leg, but on the other side of the runway and in the opposite direction. Once he reached the far end of runway 16 left, he made a left turn into the crosswind leg and then another left turn into the downwind leg, whereupon he was cleared to land by the tower. Now, just as there are non-standard departures that pilots can use, there are also non-standard approaches that can be made, the most popular of which is the straight-in approach. Suppose you were approaching the Long Beach Airport from Burbank, which is just about due north of the airport. It would certainly save quite a bit of time if you could make a straight-in approach to runway 16 left from the north, rather than fly all the way to the point where a normal entry is made to the traffic pattern. If this is more convenient, all you have to do is ask permission for this special approach, and unless the traffic is unusually heavy, your request will be granted.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 6-4 Victor, 6 miles north of your airport. I have your numbers. Request straight-in approach to runway 16 left, over.
Beach 6-4 Victor, report 3-mile final approach for 16 left.
6-4 Victor, roger.
The pilot used the phrase, "have your numbers," to tell the controller that he had all the landing data and there was no need for him to waste time repeating the various figures.
Long Beach Tower, Beechcraft 6-4 Victor is on final approach 3 miles out, over.
Beach 6-4 Victor, continue approach.
To continue your approach means, in essence, you are cleared to land, but there is traffic on the runway. By the time the pilot gets closer to the airport, the runway should be clear, and then the tower will follow up with...
Beach 6-4 Victor, cleared to land. Right crosswind, 10 knots, over.
6-4 Victor, roger.
Here's an interesting experience we had during one particular approach. It should be quite useful at a point. We were approaching the Long Beach Airport from the north and requested a straight-in approach.
Long Beach Tower, this is Beechcraft 2364 Victor, over Disneyland. Request a straight-in approach, over.
Bonanza 6-4 Victor, Long Beach Tower. The weather is below VFR minimums due to a fog bank obscuring the south end of the airport, over.
Roger. We can see the airport clearly and can make the runway with no trouble at all.
Bonanza 6-4 Victor, the last reported visibility toward the south was 1/2 mile in fog, over.
Well, we can see the airport from here. May I have landing instructions, over?
Beechcraft 2364 Victor, this is Long Beach Tower. Advise current Long Beach weather, sky partially obscured, visibility 1/2 mile, fog. Cleared to land, runway 16 left, wind calm, altimeter 2986, time 1705 daylight, over.
6-4 Victor, roger.
Even though the airport was closed, we were cleared to land. A control tower is there to assist and aid aircraft and to control traffic. He cannot prevent you from violating the civil air regulations. Since there was no other traffic in the Long Beach traffic pattern, the tower operator had no recourse but to clear us to land. He advised us of the weather and did what he could to help us. Remember, even if the weather is 0-0, You may be cleared to land as long as you are not conflicting with other traffic. It is the pilot's responsibility to know his limitations and to be fully informed of what is legal and what is not. A thorough knowledge and understanding of the civil air regulations will prevent these types of misunderstandings. Fortunately, 6-4 Victor did not proceed with his approach. Had he done so, he would have forced the tower operator to write up an incident report on the pilot, resulting in a possible fine or license suspension. Remember, if you're in doubt about something, just ask the tower operator, and you can save yourself a lot of unnecessary trouble.
Long Beach Tower, this is 6-4 Victor. Under the existing weather conditions, would it be legal for us to land? Over.
Negative 6-4 Victor. Do you still intend landing at Long Beach? Over.
Negative, Long Beach. Thanks anyway. We'll go over to Torrance and land.
Bonanza 6-4 Victor, roger.
We've gone through a great deal of communications. This hasn't been an attempt to cover the entire field, but rather to give you a good exposure and a solid foundation in the topic of communications. Any problems that you might encounter while operating within control zones can always be solved, and doubts can be eliminated by simply asking the man whose job it is to help you, the tower operator. As you gain more confidence in the use of your radio, you'll learn to take advantage of other services provided by some of the major airports, such as approach control, radar assistance, and so forth. There are many airports throughout the country that have direction-finding equipment that the tower operators can use in helping lost aircraft to find their position. Any airport that has this service is indicated on your aeronautical charts by the letters DF under the name of the airport. If you should lose your position, a quick call to a tower having direction-finding equipment will more than likely result in immediate assistance.
Los Angeles Approach Control, this is Cessna 7026 Echo, 119.3, over.
Cessna 26 Echo, Los Angeles Approach Control, over.
Roger. We're rather confused and we've lost our position. Would it be possible for you to take a DF fix and assist us to the Los Angeles airport, over?
Cessna 26 Echo, Los Angeles Approach Control, what is your altitude now?
Present altitude is 6,500, over.
Roger, and what is your magnetic heading, over?
Present heading, 190 degrees.
Heading 190, roger. Maintain VFR at all times, Los Angeles altimeter, 2991.
26 Echo, roger.
All right, and key your transmitter for 5 seconds, over.
26 Echo. 26 Echo, over.
To key your transmitter means you should depress your microphone button. Although you aren't talking, your transmitter is still sending out radio carrier waves. These waves are received by the highly directional antenna at the airport. The operator looks at a radar scope, and when you are transmitting, a line of light points directly toward you on the radar screen, thereby enabling the operator to determine your position.
All right, what is your magnetic heading now?
I'm still maintaining 190 degrees.
Heading 190, roger. Turn left, heading 070. Maintain VFR advice when you're on that heading, over.
Turning left, heading 070 degrees, roger.
Los Angeles Approach Control, this is Apache 1086 Pop.
Apache 86 Papa, Los Angeles Approach Control, over.
86 Pop is just north of the Long Beach Airport. I'm descending to cross Downey 2,000 feet, northbound.
Apache 86 Papa, that is approved VFR. Numerous targets inbound on Victor 16. First one is an American Boeing jet approaching, or just by Downey, followed by a United DC-7, should be over Downey in about 2 minutes. Report north of Downey.
Report north of Downey, thank you.
26 Echo is now steady, heading 070, over.
Roger, 26 Echo.
26 Echo, turn right heading 225.
225 degrees, roger.
Cessna 26 Echo, what is your altitude?
We're still maintaining 6,500 feet.
Roger, maintaining 6,500. Key your mic 5 seconds again, please.
26 Echo. Echo, over.
Cessna 26 Echo, turn right heading 235.
Turning right, heading 235 degrees, roger.
Cessna 26 Echo, what is your airspeed?
We're truing out at about 125 knots.
26 Echo, turn left heading 230.
Turning left, 230, roger.
Cessna 26 Echo, key your transmitter.
26 Echo. Over.
Cessna 26 Echo, turn left heading 215.
26 Echo.
Air Force Jet 36008, contact Los Angeles Tower 263.0 now. Cessna 26 Echo, key your transmitter 5 seconds.
26 Echo. 26 Echo, over.
Cessna 26 Echo, getting an indication you're crossing over Los Angeles at this time, over.
Roger, we've got the airport in sight. Thank you very much for your assist.
26 Echo, maintain VFR, Los Angeles approach control out.